Well, senior U.S. officials have met with Russian President Vladimir Putin to discuss a potential plan to end the war in Ukraine. But after nearly 5 hours of talks, the Kremlin says they are no closer to a resolution. Emanuelle Chaze is a journalist covering the war in Ukraine, and she joins me now. Emanuelle, good to have you back on the program. Now, we saw Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner go into these talks with Putin, looking to progress that peace deal to end the war. Doesn't seem like it's gone to plan for the Americans, has it?
Well, it doesn't go according to plan for Americans, and there's one important element missing in those talks that we saw yesterday in the Kremlin, and it is the main country that is interested in that peace, which is Ukraine, that has been attacked by Russia nearly 4 years ago at the full-scale level. And of course, even if today there are discussions taking place in Kyiv with Volodymyr Zelensky, everything that has been discussed yesterday was done without Kyiv, and indeed we are nowhere near a compromise being found, because we have two positions that are irreconcilable, if you will, because Russia has territorial demands that Ukraine is not ready to consider. Ukraine considers as a compromise to already start negotiating from the actual front line, meaning all the illegally occupied territories that Russia has conquered since 2022, which I have to remind our viewers, this amounts to barely 1% of the Ukrainian territory. So we cannot really talk of a military victory. And Russia, on the other hand, would like Ukraine to concede even more territories, including territory that it hasn't even militarily conquered.
Yes, so this has been a big rejection from both the Kremlin and Kiev. What now for U.S. negotiators and Donald Trump's efforts to end the war? Because Zelensky has said that he fears that the U.S. may lose interest in achieving lasting peace. So is that a real possibility that the U.S. just pulls out?
Absolutely, and that's a fear also shared by Ukrainians. And, we've talked about the Ukrainian people quite often. Nobody more than Ukrainians would like to live in a country at peace, but they are still under daily Russian attacks, be it by missile, by drones, by glide bombs. And of course, there's a more than 1,000 kilometers long front line to defend by the Ukrainian side. And if you will, everybody is interested in peace in Ukraine, but peace could arrive quite quickly only by one word of Vladimir Putin, who is not ready for that peace just yet. On the contrary, he also, launched veiled threats against the European Union, saying that he was ready for a war to start immediately with Europe. So Kyiv, of course, fears that it would lose support, economic support, support also in terms of air defense, in other weaponry by the US. But also we have to keep in mind that Ukrainians, from their perspective, see that they have no choice but to defend themselves against this aggression.
Yes, and what do Ukrainians feel? I mean, you are there, you spend most of your time in Ukraine, you live there. What do the people on the street think about the manner in which the US has been conducting these negotiations?
Oh, they definitely feel betrayed by Washington in many ways, because they've been excluded by most of the talks, because Vladimir Putin has been reinstated on the international stage, particularly in the summit of Anchorage. And they simply don't feel that they are being heard by the American side. And of course, there's a feeling of this situation being deeply unfair, because there is a clear aggressor, there is a clear defender. And, there's a lot to say about Ukrainian resilience. They are resilient, they are continuing. And as much as they are exhausted, they live like millions of people live without electricity, without water, sometimes also without heating at a very cold time of the year. It's also a war of survival for Ukrainians. They know what it means to live under occupied territories. There are 6 million Ukrainians, including 1.5 million Ukrainian children living in occupied territories. And when they don't abide by the rules of the Russian occupier, it means torture, it means deportation of children within the Russian Federation. And that is the reality that Ukrainians would like to avoid. So even if they want to have this peace more than anyone else, they also know that they have no choice really to continue defending themselves against this aggression.
Yes, and Vladimir Putin, he was already playing his cards before this US delegation arrived, putting out a very strong statement blaming Europe for trying to prevent the US from achieving peace in Ukraine. Will Putin be successful in driving a wedge, divisions between Europe and the US?
Well, he's already very successful in that he's placed himself on on an equivalent position as Volodymyr Zelensky. But this is a false equivalence because there is an aggressor, there is a defender, and we tend also to forget that because we need to report, of course, on both positions. So in terms of of information, he already managed to place himself as someone that is in the deciding seat. Even though I was just reminding the military conquests of Russia since 2022. Are not, so blatant that Russia is actually in a position to force Ukraine to give up even more territory. So he's been reinstated on the international stage. He's comfortable enough to actually voice thinly veiled threats against Europe. So on that front, at least, Russia has the upper hand. But when it comes to negotiations, Ukraine has a constitution. It has allies which so far still stand by Kyiv. And I'm thinking about the European allies, and Europe has stepped up also when faced with this very changing policy of Washington towards Ukraine. So far, Ukraine can still count on those allies to defend itself.
Yes, of course, we must remember that the fighting is ongoing. The war continues as these negotiations happen. But what do you make of Russia's claims that it's captured that very strategic city of Pokrovsk? Ukraine is denying that. But what do you know is happening on the ground?
Well, let's look at the map. We see Pokrovsk, we see on open source available to us that indeed there are Russian troops within the city. Have they conquered the city? Have they occupied it? I would say no, because we still see from brigades, Ukrainian brigades that are currently defending Pokrovsk, that fighting is still ongoing. Gerasimov, the head of the Russian army, presented to Vladimir Putin a report saying that Pokrovsk was liberated as well as Vovchansk. This has been denied by the general staff here in Ukraine. Will those cities fall? This is also likely that it will happen in a few weeks, in a few months. But as things stand, this is more, in my opinion, in my analysis of what's happening on the ground, this is more a manner for Russia to put more pressure on international partners to also demoralize the Ukrainian population, the Ukrainian army, and try to feed some positive input to its own population to try and explain why it is continuing this war of aggression against Ukraine.
Okay, Emanuelle Chaze, appreciate your thoughts and your reporting on the war in Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.